You are listening to JoyFX. My name is Ed Kang, your organization development consultant, startup advisor, and executive coach. Thank you for joining me. Hope you're having an amazing day wherever, whenever you are. In this episode, I want to talk about a subject that keeps coming up for me over and over again through my executive coaching sessions, as well as organization development, and as I talk to founders, talking about scale or future scale. And the only way to truly scale is leadership, and it doesn't matter what stage you are. You might be a solopreneur right now, ready to embark on your journey, or maybe you're making a go of it and you're doing okay on your own. If you want to scale, the only way to do that is leadership. And we're going to just jump right into it right now. And I'm going to give you the statement that I tell everybody. I explain to them, if you want to scale, you must lead the managers that manage the systems that manage the organization. Let me repeat that. You must lead the managers that manage the systems that manage the organization. Therefore, there are 4 levels. If you are sitting here listening and you are an entrepreneur, business leader, founder, and executive, somebody in the C-suite, and you are trying to scale your organization, there are going to be 4 levels that come into play here. There's you, there are the managers, there are the systems, and then the rest of the organization. Once again, 4 levels. You, the leader, the managers, the systems, and the rest of the organization. And here's what I'm talking about. Leaders lead managers. If you are like most productive and high-performing individuals that achieve a certain level of success, well, you know how to be a manager. You've managed yourself, you've managed your tasks, the operation, all the current systems. Dare I say, they might be rudimentary to start. You might have been in a situation where you're just running around like a chicken with your head cut off, just doing everything, execution, execution, execution. That's the common prevailing advice, is when people say, if you want to become successful, execution trumps everything else. And that is true up to a certain point, because you might get caught up in executing the wrong things. It's very typical in an organization that's growing and starting to achieve product market fit, or getting that momentum in the marketplace, experiencing that growth, the success that we're all looking for. It's common for everybody to get caught up doing the things that feel urgent versus what is important for the organization to scale. Or in other words, everybody ends up working in their business versus on the business. And I know many entrepreneurs, business leaders who get to the point and they realize that I'm working in my business all the time. Here's a litmus test for you. If you can't leave your company for a day, if you can't not show up and everything falls apart, all right? You can't have that luxury because everything's going to fall apart while you're too busy working in the business. At best, what you want to get to is leaving, or the ability, the luxury, the opportunity, the right, dare I say, the privilege and the right to leave your business for 90 days, and it just keeps trucking along. There might not be growth, you might not be taking strategic ground, but you've earned the right to step back for 90 days. Guess what? You are truly a leader, and you have reached a point where you are scaling and you're leading the managers who are managing the systems that manage the organization. Let's get back to you. A lot of great functioning employees, maybe you've been promoted through the ranks, or maybe you started off as the founder that did everything, or the solopreneur, and you were the center of all the production, all the execution. Typically what happens is you might become a great manager. A lot of employees make really poor managers. Just because they show some technical ability, elevating them to management status might not be the best thing for an organization, and a lot of companies start to learn that lesson to their detriment. It's a painful lesson, especially if you are dealing with an organization or an industry or a product that's very technical in nature. Management requires a whole different set of skills where you're engaging, interacting with people, and you have a systems perspective versus a laser focused or tunnel vision perspective required for execution in a technical environment. So what happens is people who are competent, they hit this wall, and if they can break through the management wall, well, the next wall becomes leadership. Now, many individuals are really great leaders. They start with great leaders. They have that executive presence. They know how to influence people, build those relationships, and they'll accelerate through the management ranks if they're willing to work management. Many organizations have got great leaders, but they have poor managers, and still they will not scale. Everybody must be a great manager, even to a minimum degree. I'll use myself as an example. I believe that I'm a better leader than I am a manager, but I push myself to become a more competent manager every day by using systems. You might be familiar with the book Atomic Habits. In there, there's a quote that you will not rise to your goals, you'll fall to the level of your systems, and that's what we're talking about. You can be the greatest leader in the world with all the charm, all the leadership, all the influence, and if you don't have the systems, the management systems, you're going to fall to that level, the lowest common denominator that your systems allow. Another way to look at it, in the field of organization development, it was taught to me like this. They said, Ed, every organization, which is just one big system with a bunch of subsystems, is perfectly designed for the results it is getting. Not too sure. There's a little bit of question on who that quote is attributed to. In other words, every organization's systems are perfectly designed for the results it's getting. You don't have an excuse. You can complain all you want that it's the market trends or you're not hiring the right people or there are all these external factors, but the fact remains that it all boils down to your systems, and if you haven't managed those systems properly, you don't understand how to manage systems and implement and execute through those systems, you will not scale. But what happens is eventually you must become a leader and you must be able to lead other managers. Managers require leadership. Managers are managers, or they get elevated to that point and they stay there, they get the job and they keep the job because they know how to implement via systems. They follow the system. Great managers know how to just turn the crank and, create the sausage. That's what one of my professors, my mentors always says. Let's just turn the crank and make the sausage and figure out how that system works to create that sausage on a consistent basis. Well, if you're not leading the manager, then you're just competing with them on a management basis. You're at the same level. You must rise above that so you can pull them up. We're going to talk about a little bit more of that in a moment. But managers need leadership because they're competent. They know what they're doing and they know where to go to learn what they're doing, but they need support. They need emotional support, all that personal stuff that keeps them going, keeps them engaged in the organization, and therefore you must develop those leadership skills to lead the managers. Many leaders are told, or would-be great leaders are told, that you are only a leader when you get followers, and that is a fraction of what it takes. I'm going to up the ante and explain that you are only a leader if you have developed another leader to replace yourself. A great leader is always working themselves out of a job, especially a management job. But if you get to the point where you raise up the next generation of leaders, what you have is a perpetual system that keeps evolving and keeps building itself up, reproducing, if you will, to your benefit so you can step away. And believe me, you'll work yourself out of a job, but you are never going to be out of jobs to do. One time I was talking to some of my colleagues and I said, I can't wait to work myself out of this job. And they joked around, implying that I was saying I'm going to work myself out of a job, replace myself, and then going to go into the sunset. They said, Ed, we've been around long enough that we've worn every single hat. Trust me, you're going to have another hat to wear as soon as you work yourself out of the current hat that you're wearing. And that just speaks to the principle in which I'm talking about, that as a leader, my goal is to replace myself with another leader that eventually replaces themselves. And so when I'm promoting people in a company, and if someone says, great, I want a promotion and I want to move up in this organization, up the corporate ladder, I tell them, great, first you have to find your replacement and train them. That's your job. And they look at me and they go, that's hard. And I go, yeah, absolutely. What is the reason that I would trust you in a higher level of management and leadership if you can't replace yourself? You're not creating that vacuum of management. You're not creating that vacuum of responsibility and ownership for someone who wants to come in. So many people want an opportunity to become a manager, to gain that upper mobility. They want it, so give it to them. And if you can't, then there's an issue. I'm not going to trust you at a higher level because that's only going to become that much more important to operate if we want to get to the place of scale. Many a young buck has come to me and said, Ed, I want to make this amount of money and I want your job. And I look at them, I go, great, I'm not going to say no to that ever. Now let's talk about what value you need to create and what I need to see from you for you to come and get my job. What value must we create for the organization where everybody is making more money? We have more resources to access that allow you to get paid as much as I do and allow me to go off and do something else to create even more value for the organization. In other words, how are we going to partner together to grow the pie? And if we grow the pie, I'm willing to have that conversation with you on how to divide this pie equally. And that's what leadership is. Leaders are willing to have that conversation with other would-be managers. Next is that as a leader, because you've had that management experience and because you've learned to manage through systems, you can teach other managers to manage through those systems. I was talking with an executive today, in fact, in a coaching session, an owner of a company who is involved in the C-level management of the organization. And he goes around and asks people what they're working on. That's a natural question. I challenged him to change the way he approaches it because he was complaining to me that the managers are currently working away. They're busy. They're fighting the battle every single day. And they've developed a culture which was just fly by the seat of your pants, let's grow and get things done because they were in a moment where they caught lightning in a bottle and they grew really fast. So the culture became one of just execute at all costs, which was great. Fight the existential fight and survive and get through and earn the spoils of war, if you will, but they grew and they popped in sort of a wartime condition. And so everybody was on high alert and they just did everything that needed to be done, which is great. But now that things were calmed down and they got all this great success and they got all these clients, they're struggling with the managers and the systems to manage the organization. So what I said to the leader there, I said the same quote that I'm giving here, you want to lead the managers that manage the systems that manage the organization. But the question you should be asking them first is, what do you think a manager is? What does a manager do? Because from what I'm hearing, they're just so used to executing as frontline employees, and you gave them the title to incentivize them without any training on what a manager does. And therefore, the first step is to change the perspective, the paradigm in which they are executing from. The benefit of the question, what is a manager to you, allows you to empathize, step in their shoes, and know where you're working from. What foundation? If they say, my job is to just run around and get stuff done, and if there's a problem, I'm going to fix it, well, then they are not ready to embrace the mindset of a manager, and you might have to do a little bit of training to get that mindset in them to make them change the way they approach things. Reframe it. Because if they're operating from a certain frame where it's all about just get it done and you want to change that frame, well, that's not something that's easily done. It could also be considered a threat. You're asking me to change my frame that made me successful up to this point in time, and therefore I don't want to change the frame because what if I fail? And many leaders would be great leaders fail at that point because they've got this framework that if they replace themselves with a manager, then what will happen is they will intrinsically lose their value and what they love to do, or the value extrinsically that is expected from them, and therefore they'll be voted off the island. And this is not Survivor. Survivor is not a game of scale. Survivor is last man standing. It's actually a self-terminating system where only one person is left. That does not work in business. We have to learn to scale. In other words, how does the island grow with people and flourish, and how do we create these systems? So changing the frame, the mindset in which your managers operate from, is the first step that you might have to do if you are questioning, do my managers actually manage through the systems? Next, from that, is working with your managers to co-create the systems. Many leaders make this mistake and they create a system because they're competent. I get it. If you're competent, you can just create a system and say, I know how to fix that. Create it and drop it into the manager's lap, where you're treating them like employees. My first company that was bought, it was acquired. It was an acqui-hire. In other words, they acquired us to hire me as their manager, or I became a creative director for an exact title. And I remember being depressed and being alienated, and the boss would come around the office, and he'd poke his head in, hey, Ed, how's it going? And I looked at him and I was just destitute in this moment of hopeless despair. And I said, I'm just going to be honest with you. I think you made a mistake. You shouldn't have bought us, and I should be fired because I don't think I'm doing my job. That's how desperate I was, because I was just not feeling good about my day-to-day. And he said, all right, Ed, let me take you out for lunch. And I remember him so vividly because he was this big Danish Viking guy, and he was so gentle. And he was running his family office, which was very, very wealthy, lots of funds, and give us a great price on acquiring our company. And he sat me down and he said, tell me what you do day to day. And I explained to him, I'm running around putting out this fire, I'm talking to this department, and I'm dealing with this director, dealing with the managers of this department, etc. And he said, so what's the problem? And I explained to him, well, I just don't feel like I'm productive because normally I'm used to getting projects done. And I'm the type of person, I have enough self-awareness to know that I like closure. It's the reason that one of my executive coaches told me about washing dishes. He said, I like washing dishes because there's closure in washing dishes. Working with people, there is no closure. And I do little projects like I organize, I clean and organize at the same time. And I get so much satisfaction from it because there's a beginning, middle, and end. There's a problem, I solve it, and then I can celebrate the solution of the problem. But when I'm managing people or I'm leading managers especially, there is no end. There's no closure. It just keeps going cycle after cycle, week after week, doing the long obedience in the same direction of developing and supporting and mentoring these managers. The owner of the company, he said to me, this is precisely the reason I bought the company and precisely the reason you're in the position that you are, because your job is not to get things done during the day. Your job is to support the other people who get things done and continue to help them, train them to be better at getting all that stuff done, which was pretty much the same as me saying, I'm just saying it in a more complicated, dare I say, hopefully eloquent way of leading the managers that manage the systems that manage the organization. If I give my managers a system, I say, do it, I'm not treating them like managers. But if I say, what are you seeing and what is a system that we can work on and create together, and how can we give each other feedback? What do you need to develop the system and come back to me so we can continue to collaborate and see if we're going to implement the system? It's here I like to use a process of prototype, nurture, and embed. I tell the manager, let's prototype something. Let's do a quick mini test. Let's not overhaul the entire organization and start rewriting policy and go to HR and junk up all the works. Let's figure out how to do a prototype on a system that's going to work. And I use a delegation matrix, or we'll map out the system and do a process flowchart. And then I'll say, all right, try it. And then when that manager comes back to me, I'll say, what happened there? And if it's positive, we will continue to nurture that prototype. I will ask them, what more resources can we invest in this? What other people, systems do we need to incorporate? Because if you solve one problem in one area with another system, you're going to affect another system. Who else needs to be involved? What can I do? Who else needs to be informed of this? And try to continue this iterative growth without throwing a wrench in everything and turning all the other systems upside down. So that's the nurture phase. But then after it's nurtured and it's working on a consistent basis, there are predictable results and they keep getting incrementally better, I will say, what do we need to do to embed this and make it a policy? Put it into process, develop software around it or guardrails, guides that put the system in place and make sure they just automatically continue to operate. Whether people who are originally involved, such as me and the manager, are involved at all or around. If we get hit by a bus, it's the let's get hit by a bus test. Not to say that I'm condoning that in terms of you want to get hit by a bus. I'm saying if we got hit by a bus, does this system continue to perpetually move along? And are there enough feedback loops in the system for it to get going? Now, before you step back and think to yourself, well, I'm a solo founder or a solo entrepreneur, and I don't know how to do these things. We don't have enough employees, or we just don't have the resources to create all these systems that you're talking about. I'm going to break this down for you very simply when it comes to being, let's say, an army of one or a one wolf pack, right? The lone wolf in an eventual wolf pack. Your job is to just find that one next person and figure out how to work with them. That's it. What is the system of communication? It all starts there. So maybe for you, the next step is to get a personal assistant and have them manage one of your systems, like your calendar. That's what I have done, and that's been one of the greatest leverage points for me in my productivity. A manager doesn't have to be a C-suite, MBA toting, someone with all this Ivy League pedigree. It could be simple as a systems manager in an assistant, and they have been empowered, and you've co-created a system such as handling messages, managing your calendar, booking appointments, like I just mentioned. There are so many ways that you can delegate a system, and then your job is to lead that individual. Here's how you know you're successful in doing it. If that individual gets so effective that you can't even imagine living without them because they are so productive, and all you want to do is lead them to keep them happy so they continue running that system, well, then you've hit the right point, and you can begin to embed that system and reinforce it or create insulation so that if that person does leave, you can put the next person in there and they'll just be able to operate the system. Those are the signs that you are on the right track of leading the managers that manage the systems, but co-create those systems with your managers. Empower them, give them a sense of ownership, because if they're involved in the creation of it, they will be invested, emotionally speaking, and they'll defend it, they'll perpetuate it, they'll teach it, they'll continue to iterate, they'll guard what they've created because intrinsically they're motivated to do so. This is going to lead to joy, which I'm going to talk about just in a moment, because if you inject the emotion of joy the way I'm going to define it for you, if you've been following this podcast, you know what I'm talking about. This becomes an intrinsically motivated system, which will be fantastic. But let's move on to one more other step here. Systems manage the organization. Managers don't manage the organization. Managers, you're following along, manage the systems that manage the organization. And that's how you avoid getting this point where there's failure because of people. Some organizations run into this big, huge glut of middle management, and the organization becomes top heavy with middle management, almost like a pear-shaped, and it just does not bode well. The resources get stretched, and there's a lot of slippage, a lot of waste when it comes to the efficiencies in the operations. You can create so many systems to manage your organization. And this is the important part. Everybody has an opinion on systems. Believe me, everybody. I will go to some community leaders or other founders, and I'll say, let's work on this together. And there's no shortage of opinions. Opinions fly. There is a barrage of opinions that come my way. I listen to those opinions, and opinions are important. And I validate anybody who has an opinion. But I like to say, don't bring your opinion alone to a data fight. If you have an opinion, great. What's the prototype in which we can get data on how we're going to approach this system? Because you may think you're right based on your experience, but contextually speaking, this might be completely different. And it might not work for what we're working with right now. Therefore, what are you going to do to get data to support, to validate or invalidate your opinion? And are you a secure enough manager to allow your opinion to be invalidated? That's a big test. I've had many managers, would-be great managers. I'm talking about all the managers with this potential, and they look at me and they say, I think we should do it this way. I go, great. Where's the data? How can we test this? And they look at me like, you're questioning my management skills. You're questioning my competence. How dare you? And they get all worked up. Challenge me. How dare you challenge me, sir? Good sir, on my opinion. And then I want to throw down the gauntlet and I say, let's make this a data fight at 10 paces, right? It becomes an awkward conversation. What we can get to is a consensus of what the process is on how we are going to work these systems and then determine how those systems are managing the rest of the organization. And if you take a systems approach to it, then you will be just fine, one system at a time. Because today's systems are much more complex and they become fragile the more complex they are. Therefore, learning to simplify them can be a part of reinforcing your organization for when you scale, there's going to be pressure on that organization. It's like launching a rocket ship into the stratosphere, into the planetary solar system and shooting for the stars, shooting for the moon and getting all the stars in between. You're going to experience that tension, that pressure that's preventing you from popping through that resistance level, because every system has resistance. It's like an immune system saying, all right, this organ that's coming in or this change, I want to fight it because we like homeostasis. Same way that losing weight becomes an issue because your system is designed to maintain the weight. If you start starving and burning calories and you're in a caloric deficit and you have to use your fat storages, I'm getting a whole biology and lesson in thermodynamics in terms of weight loss. But if you're trying to burn that fat, your system is going to say, No, I don't like this because it's threatening our survival. That's the way the system is designed, which only means you have to become more intentional about pushing through that resistance. Now that you've gotten the full Monty about how you must lead managers that manage the systems, that manage the organization, and I've talked about how this works at every point in scale, the first thing to do is to take that step, whatever that step is. And that requires a step back to say, what is the next step forward, and break it down into little mini chunks. I'm going to ask you, how do you make that next step a baby step, a step a baby can take, and you will begin to start experiencing that success, and success only creates more success. When I was onboarding my executive assistant, and now she runs executive operations, we have expanded her role and her title, I took things one step at a time. I stepped back, I did an inventory of all the places that I was hemorrhaging time, or I felt inefficient, or the things I was doing that I didn't want to do that somebody else should be able to do. I looked at it from an hourly rate. If I need to be creating $400 to $800 an hour, just my effort alone, if I'm on a project, I need to be doing that for my company, then what is the reason that I'm doing a $20 an hour task just because I think I can do it better or I can do it faster? That's not going to cut it, because what am I saying? I'm telling my organization, or I'm telling myself, that I'm willing to lose $180 to $380 an hour for us. And that's going to affect everyone. Think about that. Think about what you're saying there. If you go and jump into a task that can be done for $20 an hour. Therefore, I'm going to spend the $20 and have someone do that for an hour, and then figure out, prioritize my time, my effort, my focus, so I can go make $400 an hour and look at my ROI right there. $20 to $400, that's a good deal. It takes a leap of faith, but it also takes a willingness to humbly step back and to realistically assess where you are spending your time, where your systems or lack thereof systems are stealing you of your productivity, and therefore stunting your organization from reaching scale. Let me repeat an overview. Take a step back and look at your life and say, what are the things that I'm doing to manage my organization? Or what am I doing to work in my organization versus work on my organization? And then put out of your mind how you need to scale to $1 billion or wherever you need to go. Take it one step at a time and say, what is one system I can work on, and what's one baby step in which I can delegate that and co-create that system. Co-creation is so important. Not just delegate and say, okay, you need to do this. That's just not going to work. When managers tell me, Ed, I just need to hire people who are going to do what I say, I let them know, I'm going to challenge you just a little bit. It's great. You need people who will do that, but you need a more mature individual if you're going to scale that's willing to co-create with you, give you feedback, collaborate, participate in group genius, and bring all they have to the table and be intrinsically motivated to help you. That's what you need. Take that step back, take an inventory, and then work on one baby step at a time. Finally, let's get to JoyFX. You can use the emotion of joy to accelerate the scalability of your system. Here's what I mean. Back to the definition of JoyFX that I'm teaching here. JoyFX is when a network is intrinsically motivated to create value together in strength, but especially weakness. The strength and weakness is important because as you're growing in your systems and you're punching through that resistance and you're trying to change, you're developing your organization, you are going to experience moments of weakness, and you must also celebrate the moments of strength. If you can't do both, everybody's going to lose their intrinsic motivation and things will become extrinsic. In other words, people will start to say, hey, how much are you going to pay me to fix this problem? I always know when I've lost intrinsic motivation because I start thinking about my compensation. When an individual that I'm collaborating with gets to the point where I have no joy in that collaboration whatsoever, and I become extrinsically motivated, I will start to resent being in that situation. Let's say it's stealing some of my autonomy and there's some control and I'm not feeling the joy. Then I will say the only way that you keep me here is if you pay me. But when there is joy and someone is giving that to me and allow me to access my intrinsic motivation, compensation doesn't become an issue. I am fully on board. I'm always engaged and I'm going above and beyond. And that is what you want from the people that you are leading who are going to manage the systems that manage the organization. Therefore, you must get to the point where you're okay to be with your managers in strength, but especially weakness. You want the ability to celebrate with your managers. They have to trust you. They have to feel that psychological safety with you to come to you and not just celebrate the strength. Everybody loves celebrating strength. Yay, we did it. We slayed the dragon and we overcame that huge obstacle and that problem is solved. Yay, we did it. Let's celebrate. You have to celebrate that in an authentic way. Don't get me wrong. But at the same time, if there is weakness in the system, they must feel comfortable, psychologically safe to come to you and say, I've got some feedback on the system. I'm struggling here. The results aren't happening. How many organizations do you know of or relationships where the systems aren't working, but the people feel ashamed and therefore they hide? They're not willing to go to their leaders and say, we're struggling with this system and we believe it's the system. Can we get some feedback? Instead, they either hide, isolate, stick their head in the sand, and they just try and hang on so that they don't get fired eventually. This is what happens with so many middle managers. They know they just need to keep looking busy, pushing paper around, and the results don't happen. And because they're sort of hidden in that whole layer of middle management, nobody knows what's going on. And the managers who manage that middle management are the ones that get in trouble when really it's the middle managers and the management. They are not collaborating. They're not working with each other. There are no systems between the two to optimize performance. That's the real issue. In summary, when it comes to JoyFX, if you can't be a leader and experience joy with the managers, they will never want to replace you. They will never want to grow into your position of responsibility because you are going to look miserable. I guarantee it. You're going to feel miserable. Performance is not going to be there. But if you become that leader who is a role model for the joy effects in your workplace, and they look at you and they say, wow, that is inspiring, that someone can handle strength and be in that strength, celebrate together, and we can be victorious together, but also the way they connect with us in the weak times, because systems reveal weakness. That I can go to that leader, and everybody seems to be okay to go to that leader in those moments of weakness, and they're intrinsically motivated. I feel intrinsically motivated. That's not to say everybody takes a pay cut, because compensation has to be fair. So it's not bugging people when they put their heads on their pillows at night. They have to say, wow, this is fair. I'm in a fair situation, but I'm intrinsically motivated to go create more value because I love being with this leader. If you can get to that point, nothing is going to stop you. You will only be limited by the number of people who come that you empower with JoyFX to manage the systems that manage the rest of the organization. If you are a manager at any stage and you have been thinking about how do we scale this thing, I would like to dare you, challenge you, gently encourage you to consider this statement. How are you going to lead the managers that manage the systems that manage the organization? I hope you'll join me again in the next episode.